I would like to present to you is actually the third book of a trilogy, which we did together with students. I started this at the University of Zurich and continued at the University of Bern. It started with a type of a handbook on oil and fossil fuel issues and how this affects local and indigenous communities. That was the first book where we engaged with local students and with students from the University of Zurich, actually having a look at what happens all around the globe regarding environmental impacts on oil and gas extraction, also polluting at the beginning of the pipeline. So this book was a type of a handbook and had good resonance because we were trying from an anthropological perspective to show the context where these oil and gas projects were happening and what the impact was, and what was also the local reactions to that and what were the strategies of companies and states. The same we did for a second book, which is called The Open Cut, which is on mining, where we also had about 12 different case studies in order to see what's happening in the context, not just to show environmental destruction, but also how local people react actually to these issues of mining. Mining is again very important also in the context we are today with the energy turn, and also, and that's then the third book which I have come with called Disenchanted Modernities, Mega Infrastructure Projects, Social Ecological Changes and Local Responses. Mining is really important also for green energy projects, but mega infrastructure projects are actually larger than this, as I would like to show. And I would like to take you now to a journey through a bit that book, which was edited together with a student of mine, Samuel Weissman, and it compiles 16 case studies where students in social anthropology have also mainly done their master work. So it's not just my work, it's also representing the work of students from our institute and colleagues all around the globe. Here, this is the title, and the picture which I showed, you will see this case as well, is actually taken from Standing Rock. This is a pipeline a project in the US. You have perhaps heard of this, and reactions also from local indigenous peoples to this. We will tackle this in a minute. So the title, Disenchanted Modernities, links to this issue that mega infrastructure actually come with this sort of enchantment, which is increased with a wide range of roads, rails, pipelines and ports, etc. You see here a picture actually from Morocco, a large-scale solar energy project. So the issue is that global development should come by large projects. The aim is to provide actually access to and transportation of goods and raw materials, crisscrossing large areas between and within continents. So the best example is the Belt and Road Initiative in China, which you are all familiar with. But this is just only one that actually attracts attention from other large projects which are coming. Also, green economy and climate change mitigation policies are linked to this. So energy increase trends legitimize these mega infrastructure projects. So the bigger, the better extensions for sustainable production. So it's also linked large projects to biofuel production, solar and wind energy parks, railway extensions, and dams. Enlargements of dams. There's a big discussion now, for instance, in Switzerland, that dams should be heightened very much in order to produce more green energy. Furthermore, there are geostrategic motivations to increase competition between different areas in the world and different powers, which also accelerate the planning of big mega infrastructure. So it's about really the big way of producing transport facilities, energy facilities all around the globe, which are also connected to political and not just to economic issues. So the impacts of these mega infrastructure projects are several and numerous. They legitimate actually implementing states and private sector as bringing development. So that's the enchantment. We bring development to an area which has not been developed. We bring a betterment also by modernity, and this is a discourse which is very important. So actually local people should be happy that this big infrastructure is coming, because the promise is that will give jobs. But it hides that there are many losers actually in this process. Local resource user excuse me, local resource users can often not profit from this mega infrastructure, but at the same time they see their land and land-related common pool resources, pasture, wildlife, fisheries, forestries, well products, all the things which are important for local people, specifically in the global south, because there are no jobs there, so they really rely on these resources, often held in commons or common property before colonial times, contested now as well. All these might be even more encroached. I've been doing a lot of work on land grabbing, and I think that now these large-scale projects are even on a higher scale taking away local resources from these people. So previously governed by local common property regimes or common property rules and regulations, these have been later on transformed into state property during colonial times and often privatized during post-colonial periods all around the globe, specifically in the global south. And the increase, as I said, of this mega infrastructure leads to a further, what we call in social anthropology, to a further commons grabbing process. So it's not just the land that is taken away, it's also the resources which are related to the land where people have been staying for hundreds of years or millennia. I think this is a very, very important aspect, and the enchantment comes with this idea that will show this also with this ideology. These were idle lands, they were not used, they are of no service, and now we bring them into service because we bring a new infrastructure in there. So I have to bother you with some theoretical aspects because there were some elements which we were discussing. How can we analyze all these projects? You know, large roads, new mining initiatives, new transportation, oil pipelines, etc., and specifically large wind farms, solar energy parks, etc. And how can we discuss this theoretically? One way is to say, okay, this is a new frontier. Capitalism is expanding, you know, and creates, as in the past, new frontiers where areas which were not of interest are now coming into interest for capitalism. We were a bit critically on this because it does not really discuss colonial structures. All these areas have been in contact with colonial powers. The property rights of local people have been undermined, and actually the mega infrastructure projects fall already on these contexts. So there's a historical embeddedness which is needed to this. A second theoretical element which we think is quite interesting is that of the social anthropologist James Ferguson. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. James Ferguson is an American anthropologist who has studied development issues. And he has said that actually the notion of development which is also very nicely related to this mega infrastructure, that it brings a betterment to the area. If you have a great road, if you have a pipeline, if you have a great wind park, this actually brings you further also local people. And Ferguson argues, actually in the context of Southern Africa, that this hides the power asymmetries, because it hides who can decide what type of development should come. And it's like a smoke screen that doesn't show actually who can profit from this. Perhaps you all know, and I don't have to tell you that in Scotland, all the investments now regarding wind energy and wind turbines, actually you have a lot outside foreign investment making more money, whereas actually money is taken away. There are these huge wind turbines that are planned in the Isles of Skye, which actually takes away, produces more energy for actually companies, and local people don't profit from this. But it comes, of course, with this green transition, saying, well, you will get jobs, you will get all these elements. So that comes with this new idea of actually enchantment. By calling this development, this helps furthermore, and this takes us a step further from Ferguson's very important work. Actually, it takes us to this issue of desiring machines, desire to have development, and the idea actually of this enchantment that it brings, and how do local people react to this? What do they say? How do they talk? So we switch there from this imposed idea of enchantment and have a look from a social anthropological perspective. Are local people really enchanted? or are they disenchanted? And these 16 projects which we have analyzed, actually, as I will show that, or give an indication that these people have been completely disenchanted and don't buy into disenchantment from companies and local governments. And now, to make it a bit more complicated, and I hope you bear with me, there's a bit of text here which is coming. You don't have to read it, I will explain it to you and show you a model, but I had to put several things. We went further and had a look, how can we sort of include the external changes with what is happening, and we come up with a new theoretical approach which we are using, which is a combination from new institutionalism, looking what are the rules and regulations which are used and applied, and taking power analysis from political ecology, what are the power dynamics which sort of are happening in this context. So land and land-related compool resources previously held in common property, if we take this back historically, face an institutional change from the commons to state and private property, or to open access if the states are not able to manage this. They face a change in value, actually. So these areas suddenly, which were important for the commons, for local livelihoods, become an asset actually for mega infrastructure projects. So this value is sort of changed externally. Actually, this falls on local pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial power and institutional constellations. Meaning before that, these resources have been taken away. So before that, rules and regulations have been set up how resources are governed. And then the mega infrastructure projects fall already on these changes, and governments and investors can use some of these new institutional contexts, say, well, it's a private area, it's an area of the government, so we can use this. We don't have to ask local people what should happen. So that's the major important thing there. But there's a power struggle actually also taking place. So there are different power aspects. So actors from outside might have capital power. They might have actually cash and the capital to bring these changes. They also have the power to say, we bring development, disenchantment things, to have this discourse of development, so discursive power, actually, which is related to the power of ontology. That means the study of the being and the being of an area, which is then framed as being empty, not used by local people. And that's very powerful, because that gives legitimacy to use tracts which are in this discourse actually not being used. Although there are pastoralists, there are fishermen, there are a lot of people using that area. That sort of discursive power also, and the structural power, together with this ontological power of separating nature and culture, saying this is an area not used, are actually very important in these processes. Let me show this in a model, if this had been perhaps a bit complicated. So this is the model we're using. You see here external environmental, physical, social aspects, changes in the environment. I would also add market changes there, actually increase and decrease of prices for energy, etc. And then you have local population. It really matters for the variation of an area if you have a lot or few people in there, if you have immigration, out-migration, and you have technology. And that's also where these infrastructure aspects are, what technology is used or can be used. And that impacts actually here. Now the pointer is not working. Can you see it? Okay. That actually impacts how an area is valued. So this relative price is how valuable such an area is. And that falls into an internal context, which is an internal action arena, where actually the bargaining power or the power of local people to say, well, this has been our area, we have been using this for a long time, is challenged by other users. These other users sort of say, well, it's no longer a commons, for instance. It's no longer common property. It's the property of the state. So we can use it for other purposes, and then use ideologies, narratives. This area had been underdeveloped. Discourse, we bring modernity in order to legitimate actually then mega infrastructure projects, and leading to organization where the local organization is weakened and actually local people can no longer decide on resource management. That leads then to distributional effects. So actually there are winners and losers. The gains from these projects are not going to local people, and that leads also to behavior. Local people, and that's the important point here, are actually then reacting to these mega infrastructure projects. It's not that they just lie idle and don't do anything. So our book shows that there are several reactions to this. If we take this now further, is that all these power elements are important. So it's the discursive power of development that raises suddenly the value of a certain area because it attracts capital. You know, investors come and say, well, this is great. If a road is set up somewhere, I can also come with my development. I invest in there because there's money to be made. Discursive power technology, for instance, well, we need a green transition, you know, we need to comment. That is really powerful. So for local people, it's very difficult to say something against it. And that then falls on this internal action arena where the ontological power, this means the power to separate nature and culture. This had been just nature, you know. We use now that nature. This is a very powerful and has been used in many cases, whereas the ontology of local people to say, no, this is a cultural landscape, we've been using this for a long time, this is a commons, is not recognized or has to be contested. We will see them in cases sort of how this is done. And then again, distributional effects, who has the power of money to distribute, to gain from it, to go to the stock exchange, to make money with it. Local people cannot do that easily. Companies can do this. And also the reaction where the ontological power is very, very important for local people. One of the few things local people have is to say, well, this is not just idle land, you know, this had been land from our forefathers. We have a religious relation to that land. We will see this specifically in the case of Standing Rock, where people are arguing it's not just about pollution, you know, it's about our relation with the land and has a spiritual aspect. But the question is, how much power does this sort of, you know, spiritual relation has compared to the naturalist power to say, well, America needs first oil. We need to transport this oil. You know, we don't know what the Russians are doing, etc. So we need to be independent. And this area is just, you know, just nature. I mean, it will do harm, and if it does harm, it's not a problem. So having gone through this, and I hope I didn't lose you there, there's a very last point on the here, which is also important. Mega infrastructure projects as so-called docking stations. Once the whole thing starts, big roads, mining, soil and wind energy, it attracts other projects. It attracts then desires specifically from investors, but as well also from governments in order to do more of control of these areas. So additional projects which come there. So I would like to take you quickly to four case studies which are in the book, representing a bit four different areas. So Asia, African context, the Americas, but also Europe, which are in this book. So 4 cases out of 16. I will take you quickly through this so that you get an impression what students have been doing, where they have been doing research. One area is in China, Pakistan, the economic corridor in Balochistan. It's a flagship actually of the Chinese vision of the Belt and Road initiatives. It used 62 billion US dollars, and you see here specifically a big port which had been installed there. It's an enchantment discourse which is important. People of Balochistan are told that this project brings actually jobs, it brings also important aspects. And here the idea of James Ferguson, of this anti-politics machine, of this machine actually hiding who decides on what is going on here, is very important, because local people have not been asked if they want this port and if they want the road. So local people are very, very immediately disenchanted. You know, different local tribes, actually fishermen and also pastoralists, because their roads who are cutting pastoral areas actually are left out, and it takes away fisheries and pastoral commons. But local people have very little bargaining power in this context. They cannot sort of speak up and say we don't want this. But but it fuels nationalist feelings and there's organized military groups, liberation armies, and that again actually leads to more control by the central government. So local reactions to this is very minimal, and then it's embedded in a local military sort of uprising, which can be cut down again by the government saying, well, we have to have law and order. So it's very minimal what local people bring in on the ground can. It's also fear that new projects will come in and people will lose actually more and more land. Some local protests, but really in the context limited of this sort of state which is controlling actually everything in Pakistan. The next case which I want to show, which shows a bit more protest from the local level, which is aired, is the Lapset corridor. This is a big investment project in Africa connecting Kenya, Port Lamu, to actually Ethiopia and Southern Sudan with a huge highway, with a huge port, with railway, with also oil transporting facilities. One of our students did research in Lamu, where the port was enlarged in order to show what is happening. And there, it's all this being in line with this Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Sustainable Development Goal 9 on sustainable infrastructure. But what is happening is that the promise of jobs and development was actually given, but more than 10 years later, after many actually changes in the port, there's a huge disenchantment there, fishery grounds and mangroves, as well as the fishery commons have been completely destroyed. So local people depending on the fisheries don't have access to this anymore. At the same time, I have to mention here that they gain a bit of money from tourism, but also tourists don't come here anymore. So less attractive for tourism there, and no compensation have been paid so far. So there are some protests and also law cases filed by local communities, but actually apart from these protests, very little can be done actually there. So they raise up, they do rallies, but there's not much that has changed. And again, jobs are not there. Also local people who are well sort of trained won't get the jobs, because for the management of the port, people will employ actually or recruit people from Kenya or from Nairobi and from other big cities, and not from the areas here. So people actually lose the basis of resource, and by the way, also the whole biodiversity of fisheries lost. The third case that shows a bit more empowerment somehow. So we move from lower power to medium-sized power to a bit more power context, is the example of the Americas in USA, the Dakota pipeline, Standing Rock. So this pipeline should go through actually sacred land of local indigenous Sioux people, and there are protests since the onset with strong external support. Perhaps you all have heard of the Standing Rock campaign. People also from outside were supporting this. So for the government, it was not so easy actually to shut this down. So apart from, I mean, nobody of us has heard what's happening in Port Lamu in Kenya. We haven't heard of Balochistan, but here we have heard. So there's media attention there, and actually more, I would say, discursive, but also ontological power, because the view of local people that this is sacred land has been heard and has attracted some attention. So, but it's also related to presidential politics. I don't have to tell you, you know, I mean, Barack Obama stopped it. Trump was one of the first things he did when he became president. He said, you have a go, then Biden stopped it again. What's next? Actually, we don't know exactly. Enchantment of energy deliveries, but local immediate disenchantment and environmental consideration by the tribal council that this might pollute, but also it will destroy sacred areas. The protest it's not just health and water, but pollution, but this other ontology, it's harming sacred land. I think this is a very important thing here, where this ontological power, which says it's not just nature, but it's related to our beliefs, had been something which was very important for the protests here. And they resist also collaboration for environmental assessments, because they say, well, environmental assessments alone which would again be this separation of nature and culture, doesn't bring us actually what is important for us. For us, the sacredness of the area is the important thing, and that is also what fueled the protest. So wanting to shut down immediately, this is not an area where this has to go through. That was the position of the indigenous peoples there. I come to the last case study before I come to a conclusion of the book. This is a European case. I don't know if you have heard of this. It's the Fosen wind park in Norway, which has also attracted a lot of investment, also Switzerland, Swiss banks, the Credit Suisse, which became Debbie Swiss and then is no longer there, had some investments in there. Also, the regional energy provider from whom I get my energy at home in Switzerland has also been involved in this project. It's a good one, one which local people are involved, which brings green energy, which takes away Norway from actually this sort of addiction of oil energy. So, largest wind energy project in Europe with 6 wind parks and 277 wind turbines. A huge thing, And actually, I mean, it's not a problem because it's just on this land which is not used. There's some reindeers moving up and down. And the indigenous reindeer herders of the Sami were not asked, but their communal pastures were taken away. Now, I don't know what you know about pastoralism, but what our student Bettina Wieler found out that this is happening in a winter pasture, and for the whole transhuman setting, if you take away that pasture, you can no longer do the transhuman. So the whole local economy will collapse if the reindeers can no longer go there. And these wind turbines actually cause fear among these reindeers. So this is also at the porch is interesting because people stay together with local people and see what's happening. So Bettina was also running around with these pastoralists, seeing how it was very difficult to herd these reindeers because they were very much afraid of these wind turbines. So this is also something where research is not, from at the porch, is not only about listening to people, but also experiencing what is happening. So I think this is very, very important and also should go into some of the analysis. The problem, these herds and these winter pastures, that they can no longer be used, is that really their way of life is at stake there, and the green enchantment which comes along and the participation which is said that this is done in participation with local people is actually a lie, because these people were really not involved. Negotiations were late or broken promises on herding compensation, and the number of windmills in that specific area was saying, well, we just set up 10. And in the end, suddenly it was 80. So the whole area was actually then covered with windmills, although actually local people were filing complaints about this. So disenchantment, very immediately not respecting indigenous status, and also acting against the will of indigenous peoples and also legal aspects. While the court cases and the protests were successful, so there was a court saying the whole thing has to stop, actually the mills are already built. So it's how we say in French, a fait accompli. I mean, it's something which is already there, and you cannot sort of take this down immediately. So these are some of the examples, and I would like to show you that you can't read this, but if you have a look at the book, which I can show around, we have 5 cases from Asia, 5 cases from Africa, 3 cases from the American, 3 cases of in Europe. I will come quickly to the Swiss case towards the end. So analysis very quickly on state and company strategies. In all cases, company come with this enchantment issue. In 7 of these cases, combined with green development and mobilized structural power with discursive power, and also naturalist ontological power, saying, well, this is idle land, this is nature. We just use it for a better and green and infrastructure turn. So this is what is going on. There are 4 forms of these sort of anti-politics machines related to development, ranging from actually smoke screen of state repression, smoke screen of land grabbing, also smoke screen of green grabbing, that in the name of the green energy turn, land and resources are taken away. And also the last thing is development imperative, that anti-politics machine was used in this case of saying we bring progress, we bring jobs, we bring actually a betterment for the earth. So in 14 cases, land and land-related resources previously had in common property are taken away. So from these 16 cases, we can say in 14 cases, it's really not just land grabbing, but it's commons grabbing. And this is really serious for local people. It's serious because there are no alternatives. There are no jobs. If they lose that land, they lose their livelihoods. And there's also no other things which they can do. And in addition, I would say they are guaranteeing that the diversity in these areas, in these cultural landscapes are maintained. But if it's a mega infrastructure later on, it is gone. It's also for us if we care for biodiversity, for instance. More democratic countries, what we have seen, also offer more options to legally challenge governments and companies, but compared to countries with autocratic political systems, so more bargaining power in countries where there is more or less a higher level of democracy. So that's the case regarding the analysis of state and company strategies. So state and companies, if it's more democratic, they have to pay more attention. But we also have seen in the case of Norway, sorry guys, the windmills are already put up. Now, a court case, but there's no court case that says, okay, let's take this down immediately. That is not happening. So there's also the question regarding this bargaining power aspect. Local reactions range from anti-politics to politics machines. In 12 out of 16, there's an enchantment immediately. So people really know, this is not for us. This is for somebody else. It's for investment. It's for the government. It's actually for attracting also funds internationally. Because also no jobs, no compensation, so do not turn out to meet the costs which are lost from the commons grabbing. In 4 cases, actually, the mega infrastructure is not implemented, but it might turn up anyway if these relative prices, which are shown in the model, sort of are changing. In 5 cases, interestingly, in some cases in Asia, there was a local enchantment a little bit. Okay, we give new jobs. Okay, we give the land. We will get money for the land, but through the process, immediately these people turn into being disenchanted from this hope regarding this modernity. What is also very interesting is, I showed in the model this institutional element. What is interesting in that section is that if you do an analysis of local institutional context, you don't have just one institution, but multiple institutions, rules and regulations. So selecting among those depends on the power that people have to be able to select. For instance, Sami were able to select indigenous legal rights which are part of the constitution of Norway. So they used this in order to file a claim. This is a good example to show how institutions are selected. Whereas companies and state select institutions regarding we need to have the energy turn, and there are legal elements there. So in the analysis of all the cases, it's interesting to see who has the power to select in this diversity of rules and regulations what exactly, and also local people sort of do this. So in 9 cases, we had institution shopping, selection of rules and regulations from below out of the 16 cases. So local actors were making use of this institutional diversity in order to address the enchanted modernity with institutional means, not just protesting and say, hey, we can file a claim, we can actually say there's a problem with environmental pollution, etc. But this is only the case in more democratic states, and the range is also partly limited. Often other identities, and that's important, and ontologies of local actors from sort of animistic views, that means everything has a soul in the environment, that we need to sort of have a good engagement with this sort of living environment, which is a co-world from this perspective. That can be a very powerful aspect, but it can also be overridden very immediately by states who want actually development and say this is just pure nature and this is just sort of backward religious beliefs that local people have. But in all the cases, actually we saw this that even in non-spiritual sort of contexts, such as in Switzerland and Italy, people show it's not just about an economic aspect, an environmental aspect. People in all these places have a deep relation to that land and to these landscapes. And for a social anthropological perspective, this is a very, very important aspect. And they try to use this in many contexts as well. So it's not just that the land is always taken away, it's like a drama. It can range from people being able actually to mobilize the power to defend their territories, or they have too little power, too little discursive, too little structure, too little ontological power actually to fight this mega infrastructure. So ranging from these different aspects, we have reactions from the local level, which is low reaction, low bargaining power, so-called weapons of the weak, which relates to the late anthropologist James Scott, who just died a couple of months back, who says, well, you don't see an immediate reaction, but that doesn't mean local people are not reacting. You need to do fieldwork, you need to see how they're reacting, but it doesn't come up, but they know what is actually happening, but they don't have the power to show this immediately. 7 cases were there, which we saw up to local reactions with higher bargaining power, some protests, discussion, perhaps even some small law cases like in Kenya, for instance, and then real politics machine of trying to halt the mega infrastructure project. Legal strategies related to different animistic and totemistic ontologies, views of cultural landscape ecosystems as being important to actually to protect, and the cultural survival, which is also linked to this. So there were 6 cases where we really see that people are trying to mobilize and use everything which they have, mainly in cases where the democratic rights are actually upheld. And what does this mean now for future studies and policy actions? So it's not the issue to be against infrastructure, it's the issue actually who drives them, who can use them, and who pays the costs for them. It's the issue of how do structural, discursive, and ontological power impact this process in this drama, you know? How can this drama, it's not a tragedy always, it can be a tragedy, but it can also be a drama. How can this turn around to actually lead to a more sustainable infrastructural sort of process? And how can participatory processes be set up? Also, recognition of this view that actually where these mega infrastructure projects are hitting on, these are cultural landscapes. So that we really can show this is not just idle land from a local perspective, but this is a living ground, and I think that's very, very important. So harnessing local ideas of fair play regarding MIPs. Often the question which we see in the fieldwork which comes is the following. Why is it that conservationists can discuss with project managers while indigenous and local groups are excluded and sidelined and forced to drive expensive law cases? That means why can other actors, NGOs who have environmental concerns, can raise issues there in all the cases, and we have to struggle strongly to have our rights to the land and to the territory sort of recognized? And that's a question which comes up immediately. I would like to finalize my presentation with this. You cannot read this, but this is a leaflet from Switzerland, from the city of Biel, which is, I don't know whether you're familiar with Switzerland, it's in the canton of Bern. You know, we have these several cantons, which are districts. It's the 2nd biggest city, and there an interesting thing happened. Also there was the idea of a mega infrastructure. The connection of the city to a local highway. And that would have meant the destruction of an urban cultural landscape which is very dear to local people. Now people started protesting. People said we don't want this because a lot of houses would have been destroyed, parks, trees, etc. So what they did is they actually set up a movement, and this is not an indigenous peoples, this is a sort of an area in the city where people started discussing with each other, how can we do it differently? There were people having a legal background, filing, sort of legal claims. There were people being engineers saying, well, we could do differently, if the traffic comes in this way, we could use this road, we could, in order to maintain actually that whole context. And they were very, very successful because in the end, the connection to the highway was not set up, and they were also politically very successful to sort of change this. This means, compared to other cases, the following aspect. There was a fair platform for discussions, including wiser ideas of infrastructure. It's not we are against infrastructure, but we could do it differently. Big is not always the solution, you know. So we could have ways in how to accommodate actually the whole transportation from the highway into the city in a different way. Very intelligently done, also using media coverage to actually fuel this idea and to think beyond what I put here, the mega size term. What does this mean for all the projects there? It means it is clear powerful actors want the mega for economic and political reasons, but it's also about learning how and when dominant power relations can be changed in a geostrategic world, and how to bring in local ideas of how infrastructures could be set up, local ideas how the green turn can be made. And that, of course, is not so easy in autocratic states, you know, where there's no democracy, but at least we should try in democratic states that in Switzerland, where the energy turn is now coming up. Unfortunately, the Swiss government and also the parliament has said yes to a sort of law that reduces local critique of large solar and wind energy projects, and there's a battle going on now. We will have some more research on this aspect, how people are still able, in order to sort of discuss and negotiate what type of energy term they want. You know. So it's a very interesting process. We will have more research on what's going on in Switzerland, because if we can show what's happening in a highly democratic country, that might be interesting for other countries as well. What this shows is it's not just about stopping the mega infrastructure, seeing that the impact is not so high, but harnessing when externally the value is raised for areas for have mega infrastructure projects, also for the green turn. How is it able for local people not just to block negative aspects, but also to come up with new ideas on how infrastructure and the energy turn can be set up. With this, I stop my presentations. I had 2 slides, more theoretical one, but I leave this now because I used a lot of time. Actually, if people are interested in the PowerPoint presentation, also the last 2 slides were integrated the discussion in this new institutional political ecology, see what is happening exactly. You can use this. But I think for now, I stop my presentation so that we have time for discussions. Thanks a lot for your attention.